and everything. Okay, thank you for the recording. And yeah, we'll give you the floor if you need to talk. Please, if you're talking in the chat, just remain on topic what we're talking about. We're going to talk about some really different things, and also some problems in how can we solve this. So please keep that in the chat. The event, as you saw right now, is being recorded in the chat as well. So if you guys have any problems with that, please talk to us. And please keep the time allotted to you, because we will have a lot of things to discuss today. So please, yeah, make sure that we talk about everything today. So, all right. Okay, I think this is it. Before presenting the next speaker, I'm going to leave her here. I'm going to leave Shannon here. I have some things to talk to you about the event today. So, so basically, we'll have 3 different sessions, 3 different speakers about 3 different subjects about the chemicals and waste problem. So Shannon, she's going to talk a little bit about what is the problem, why should we care, and all these types of things. So I'm going to introduce Shannon. She is 24 years from the USA, and she's done so much already. It's crazy. So Shannon, she has worked alongside with communities over 6 years to investigate uncontrolled chemical contamination at also industrial sites, and also indirect and policy attention to the pollution crisis. So Shannon has been inside this. She previously served as the toxic program director of the nonprofit Edison Wetlands Association in New Jersey. Now she's working on remediation projects with environmental engineer firm in Indianapolis and on independent environmental advocacy. And her work has taken her everywhere, out from the field, analyzing samples, to a lab. So digging into environmental mysteries, this is really cool. In government file rooms, to pushing action for behind podiums in Washington, D.C. So if you guys want to follow Shannon, that's her Twitter, Toxic Detective. I love this handle, by the way. And she's going to talk a little bit about the chemicals and waste problem and how we can address it and why we should care about this. So please, Shannon, take over my screen. I'm going to stop sharing right now. The floor is all yours. And please explain to us why we should care about chemicals and waste and all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliana, and hello, everyone. Welcome. So glad to have you here. Let me just pull my screen up. Here we go. Okay. And let me just make it so you guys can see this okay. Here we go. Okay, so hi everyone again, and thank you so much for joining us, as Juliana so eloquently introduced all of us to this chemicals and waste event. We appreciate you participating in our session to talk about an issue that has severe impacts on both people and planet, but it's far too often overlooked when it comes to environmental issues being prioritized. So let's set the scene a bit of the magnitude of this issue and how it's interlinked with other global environmental concerns. While no country has been exempt from contending with the invisible enemy, COVID-19, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres addressed the world at the height of the pandemic in 2020, saying we're also facing another triple planetary emergency, that of environmental harm. And the 3 pieces to this emergency are climate change, nature and biodiversity, and chemicals and waste, which is our focus today. A few facts and figures here. Just in 2021, along with that year being one of the last 7 years that had the highest global average temperatures, 10 countries from Canada to Tunisia and everything in between broke national heat records in 2021. So that's the climate change issue we're dealing with. 1 million plus species faced extinction due to accelerating habitat destruction. And finally, the UN Human Rights Special Reporter just this week released a report submitting that pollution results in premature deaths of 9 million people annually, which is more than the first year and a half of our pandemic. So this is definitely an issue of huge magnitude that needs addressing. So now let's take a look at some of the global trends of chemical manufacturing. The chemical industry is the second largest manufacturing industry globally, and the rate of production, as you can see, is increasing in both number of new chemicals and in larger volumes every year. And we call this the chemical burden on the earth. So global production capacity doubled in just 17 years between 2000 and 2017. It's expected to double again by 2030, so in just 8 years. We're currently producing 50 times more chemicals than in 1950, and 350,000 chemicals are estimated in the global market. We're also seeing cross-border trade increasing, increasing share of production in low and middle income countries. And these sort of large quantities are hard to wrap your head around. We're seeing in this chart, these figures are in billion metric tons. So you could kind of see that increase over time and the projected number for 2030. And it's really hard to imagine what billion metric tons looks like, but without context. But what makes these figures so concerning is that many chemicals have adverse impacts on people and the planet at very small quantities. So the more production of chemicals we have, the more chemicals there are to manage and that must be properly disposed, and the more chemicals we must study impacts on people and the planet. So the big question for this issue is, are science and policy keeping pace? So let's find out. So there has been a report within the last month released by the Stockholm Environment Institute. It's titled Outside the Safe Operating Space of the Planetary Boundary for Novel Entities. And this is such a groundbreaking report because it's the first time that scientists and experts have said that we've officially crossed the safe threshold for humanity based on the number of chemicals that we have released into the environment. So the mass production and the uncontrolled discharge of chemicals into our environment, into soil, water, air, into our bodies, that far surpasses our ability to monitor the risks of those chemicals. And the number of grossly contaminated sites worldwide is rising despite our remediation efforts. And perhaps the most dire and frightening part of this report is that most chemicals on the global market have never been tested for the full range of health effects to humans and to animals and plants and our ecological systems. They either haven't been tested completely or they haven't been tested at all. So this is such a huge issue that is being looked at in this report. And you could see the little image I have on the left there. That's a picture of children crossing through rice paddies. This is in Java, Indonesia. And there's a waterway called the Citarum River. It provides drinking water for over 25 million people, irrigation for crops, electricity. It unfortunately also was named the world's most polluted river by the World Bank. And that's because there's dozens of textile factories that discharge untreated wastewater directly into the river. Here we go. Had a little bit of a delay there. we have people from all over the world on this meeting, so there might be a few technical delays. So appreciate your patience. Here's a little bit of a play. If anyone knows the famous Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. So here's a little bit of a play on that. Here's some of the many places you'll go if you're a chemical or waste product that has been improperly disposed into our environment. So one of those places is at the very summit of Mount Everest. Researchers have recently found microplastics in samples collected near Everest summit. One of the scientists involved in this study says that the concentrations on the mountain are surprising. It is somewhere I still consider to be one of the most remote and pristine areas on Earth. Here, where I'm from in the United States, just this past year, researchers with one of our universities have counted 25,000 or more industrial drums disintegrating on the Pacific Ocean floor right off the coast of California. And there could be many more. And a lot of these drums are believed to contain the now banned pesticide, the one made so famous by Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, DDT. And this poses extraordinary threats to sea life. They were actually looking at sea lions that were having a higher rate of cancer than what would normally be expected. You could also be found in the Arctic if you're an improperly disposed chemical or waste product. Materials called persistent organic pollutants, or POPs for short. It has a much friendlier sounding name than these materials actually are. The reason why they're so dangerous is that they tend to resist breakdown in the environment. So they last a very, very long time, and they could bioaccumulate up the food chain. So it gets more and more toxic and concentrated the higher up the food chain you go. So much so, there's so much toxicity that has made its way to the Arctic that the breast milk and body tissues of some indigenous peoples in Greenland can actually be classed as hazardous materials based on the concentration of some of these materials that have been found there when they were tested. So now I'd like to take a look at real chemicals and waste disasters around the world. We obviously won't cover every aspect of the chemicals and waste crisis or the many communities impacted, the millions of communities impacted, but we can examine a few case studies of chemicals and waste management gone wrong, and hopefully spark a conversation with you all of the better world that we as youth want to see to avoid these issues in the future. So the important point here is that not only are we not assessing the risk of new chemicals that are being produced, as we talked about in previous slides, but we're not adequately monitoring the environment for what's already been released in the past. I refer to this as legacy pollution, and this is pollution that has stuck around for decades, and it could continue to for decades, if not centuries, if it's not cleaned up. And it poses great harm to the health of the communities living near these sites, and definitely need to be addressed thoroughly in order to protect the health of the people there and the surrounding environment. So let's take a look at a few of these. We have one in the United States, one example in Ghana, and then one example in India. So let's take a look. So this is a site that is a little bit close to my heart. This community is located in Franklin in the state of Indiana in the United States. And this is an investigation that I've actually been involved in. You could see the photo on the left, that's me in the middle. We're in a mobile laboratory that we drove through this community, collecting samples from different houses. And the reason we were out there doing this is you could see on the image on the right what looks like this colorful sort of lava lamp or abstract painting. You're actually looking at an aerial image of this community that we were investigating. So each one of those little gray boxes is a house, and the colorful splotch right in the middle, that is groundwater contamination. And the darker that it is, right in the middle there, the higher concentration of contamination was found. So there was actually pollutants migrating under homes in this community. And the reason why that is so dangerous is because the chemicals we were dealing with are called trichloroethylene and tetrachloroethylene. And I know that those are a mouthful. There's a lot of kind of abbreviations and phrases and chemicals and waste that we kind of liken it to an alphabet soup of a sort. But these chemicals are chlorinated solvents. And what that means is that they can migrate far and wide distances in groundwater. And they also very easily vaporize at room temperature, at normal temperatures. So what ended up happening in this community was families were tracking cases of childhood cancer, and those were increasing every year. There were children there as young as 2 being diagnosed with rare brain tumors. And unfortunately, there were a lot of children, you know, around the age of 13 and 10, 11, 12 that passed away from their aggressive cancer. So the community started to get this suspicion that there might be an environmental cause. So my nonprofit got involved with the community, and we worked alongside them to piece through about 40,000 pages of government documents. And we revealed that there was an electrical part manufacturing company in the town that was no longer operating there, but that had from the 1960s through about the 1980s, and that this site was not adequately investigated, despite it being classified as under control for nearly 20 years by our federal environmental agency, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So we came in, we ran indoor air tests of homes. We detected levels of carcinogenic vapors that exceeded the inhalation criteria, so the human health risk criteria set by our federal agency. And we found out that this company had been discharging these chemicals directly into the groundwater, and that it was spreading throughout the city's sewer system. And that's part of the way that it was coming into homes. So unfortunately, these people were experiencing this, and for all intents and purposes, some of them being poisoned in their very own home that they felt safe in and had no idea. So the key takeaway here is that when the environment around industrial sites isn't monitored properly and diligently, contamination can remain for many years and continue to expose people to harms and impact their health. So that's why it's so critical to look at the new chemicals that are being put out in the market, but to also take a look back at our toxic legacy, or so it's called, and do our best to remediate the sites that have already been damaged. So let's look at our next site. This is the Agbabloshi dump in Accra, Ghana. This has been named one of the, if not the largest, electronic waste dumps around the world. And this is a particular issue impacting children because many of the components of electronics are full of hazardous metals and dangerous materials that can be harmful to health, especially to children that are exposed. So let's take a closer look here. So this dump attracts many people from across Ghana and from neighboring countries, especially those that are among some of the poorest families and that are looking for work. And they don't only handle electronics here. There's a lot of other materials like tires that are also recycled. But what happens here is that the electronic waste comes in to this dump, and some of it comes in from countries far and wide outside of Ghana, including the United States and countries in Europe. And it's sorted and broken down and openly burned for scrap metal, because that is the fastest and cheapest way to, especially for things like wires, to burn the rubber off, so that then they have copper that they can collect and then sell. And one feature that you could see in a lot of these photos is that clouds of black smoke are sort of a constant in this area. The health impacts reported by those who live and work around the site have ranged from chronic respiratory problems, headaches, constant nausea, to developing stomach ulcers and cancers at a young age. And particularly air, soil, surface water, groundwater are heavily contaminated with materials like dioxins and PCBs that don't regularly break down and are quite harmful to health, and a suite of heavy metals like lead and cadmium. So I want to highlight here one of the key takeaways is that protecting the environment needs to prioritize protecting people and their rights too. The goal of eliminating pollution is tied directly to the other global goals, especially ending poverty and promoting decent work. So it's not just about closing some of these sites, but it's about finding ways to transition them into sustainable areas and promote remediation, while also promoting dignified jobs and ways for people to make a livelihood, because so many people depend on this site. You can't just shut it down outright without providing alternate options for people to make a living and feed their families. So it's about the chemicals and waste issue is about protecting the environment, but a key to that is protecting people. And let's look at our final case study here. This is quite a well-known one, though in my opinion, it hasn't been shared widely enough. This tragedy occurred just a short time before Chernobyl did, the radioactive disaster. So a lot of attention sort of focused on Chernobyl and sort of petered out on this tragedy. This occurred in Bhopal, India. It was a extremely deadly pesticide plant gas leak that occurred in 1984 in December, where approximately 40 tons of a toxic material called methyl isocyanate. This is an ingredient used that had been used in insecticide manufacturing. And the gas of this compound escaped out of a ruptured storage tank at the Union Carbide India Limited plant, which was a big pesticide plant that operated in Bhopal. And MIC, or methyl isocyanate, reacts violently with water. It's very reactive to water. So it is believed that the way that gas leaked out, and so much of it leaked out, was that water got into the tank when it never should have. And that's because the parent company, Union Carbide, was trying to cut costs, and Union Carbide was a United States company, a parent company for this localized plant in India. And there was a lot of maintenance there that was skipped that should have been done and could have very well prevented this disaster. The official number of deaths was reported by the Indian government at 5,295, but some activist groups like Amnesty International say that upwards of 7,000 died within the first 3 days of exposure to the gas, and could be numbers up to 25,000 plus from complications after. Children were the most severely affected. MIC is heavier than air and sinks low to the ground. And since I mentioned that MIC is very reactive with water, the way that it harmed all these people and resulted in so many deaths is that the compound reacted with the water in people's bodies and made it so that they couldn't breathe. And a lot of people choked to death after this disaster. And the most frustrating thing, and the reason why I'm highlighting this, is that this was not a one-time event that just occurred in 1984 and was an unfortunate event. This site still has not been comprehensively investigated or cleaned up after it was shut down in 1986. And people still living near the site continue to suffer health impacts as contaminated soil and groundwater remain. So the key takeaway I want to highlight from this example is that the unsafe handling of chemicals and waste, even over one day or over a couple of hours, can result in massive disasters and suffering that lasts for generations. So that's why this issue is so important. The longer contaminated sites are left without being thoroughly remediated, the more challenging they can be to address. So I would like to, if I may, turn it over to all of you. And I have a few questions for you up on the screen. How does the chemicals and waste issue impact you or your local community? What do you think we, the global youth, can do to help solve the issue? And then other than finance, what do you think the global youth need to solve the problem? So please put your hands up or participate in the chat, and we would really love to hear your responses to these questions.
Okay, hello everyone.
Hi. I was muted talking, like giving you the floor, Yusuf. I'm sorry. I totally forgot to unmute myself. But please go ahead, share with us your experiences and how you think we can address chemicals and waste.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa, for the presentation. I think chemical waste has been a problem for everybody around the world. And as for me as individual and being a topic where I have most interest and my work focus has been on chemical innovation and regulation. And I've been studying how the chemical have been transiting in the environment from the source to the fate. And we have seen how water sources have been affected. The air quality parameters have been affected, especially in the global south of the world. Personally, where I came from in Nigeria, like you find a lot of open dump sites around and open burning of waste. So that has affected the quality of the air and a lot of airborne diseases affecting people around the community, even though most people are not aware of the effect. They don't even really understand the source. They don't know maybe the science of how these actions is affecting the quality of health in that environment. But with awareness and sensitization, maybe telling people, okay, this is what to do. This is how to manage your waste in your local way. Avoid open burning of waste, open burning of open discard of chemicals, and if possible at international level with youth organization like the group of youth here, like we have ideas about chemical regulation. Then we can engage with the government and see how we can strengthen waste management or regulation, discarding of waste around the world, production of chemical regulation is good in some part of the world. The global north, they have, okay, there is a very good waste management regulation and directive. Like, okay, just like you have the European Union, you have the REACH, which monitors how this waste are being generated, how companies produce their chemicals. So everything looks more safe in this part of the world. But coming to the global south, especially places like Africa, everything seems to be in this order, even though we have the laws, but they are not working. So for me, what to do is to get these things working, to engage with the government, just like as you said, like you mentioned, the e-waste site in Ghana. A lot of people are aware of this e-waste site, and many people still come and make references to this site over the years. But when we make references to this e-waste site, we are not coming with a solution to address, okay, how can we shift the paradigm in Ghana from this e-waste site into other sustainable ways of managing waste. But we are not really passing that solution. We are just identifying the problem. For me now, what we need to do is to create solution. Okay, how can we engage this youth that are into maybe this informal waste sector? How can we provide them a decent employment in the waste sector? So for me, these are things we should be looking at in these coming days. And with this conference, I hope we can achieve more. Thank you.
Okay, guys, this was really nice. Yusuf, let me know if I'm not saying your name correctly, but this is it. This is
Yeah,
awesome, and then thank you. And that shows like how we need to get everyone together to actually solve this problem, and yeah, and governments and research and industry, and actually get everything together and get everyone together to actually change that. Yeah, if you guys, okay, we see Michael. Michael, please share with us your story, and please share with us your thoughts at all. So yeah, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you everyone. I'm Michael. I'm joining you from Zambia, southern part of Africa. And just like the previous speaker said, here dump is a little bit challenged. We have a lot of dump sites, and waste management is still something that is a challenge. And we have seen the government has policies in place. There are companies that actually work in waste management, but still there is something that I feel like should be done, especially in the southern part of the globe. It has to do with our mindset shift, and the youth should take a proactive part in sensitization, communities, teaching communities of how to take care of the environment. Here where I am, one of the challenges that has been affecting the population in terms of because of garbage, it has to do with diseases, especially those diseases like cholera sometimes, especially during the rain season like this one, like this time. So I feel like, to me, what can be done, especially when it comes to youth, it's youth active participation, well-structured groups or, that will spearhead taking care of the environment with regard to garbage. Garbage is here a big issue here. Then also, there is also an aspect of lack of skill, lack of machinery, or let me say equipment to take care of the garbage. If you move in town, you find that there are very few garbage collection bins. So it's a challenge. It has to do first with teaching the population on garbage management, but also equipment to do with where to put that garbage. It's really a challenge here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's yeah, it's crazy to see the problem of garbage as well. And I had goosebumps when you mentioned like the mindset change, which is something I believe, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're here, like to try and see what we can do and actually change the future and then make sure these things don't happen in the first place. So I'm gonna give the floor to Ibrahim. Let me know if I said it wrong, to share his thoughts too. And then I think we can move on to the next speaker. So Ibrahim, please tell us everything.
Hello, my name is Ibrahim Inusa, and I'm connecting here from Nigeria. And yes, plastic pollution and biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis has been a thing of concern in our time. And yes, from the presentation you have just met and from the previous speakers that have just spoke about the how this pollution have been impacting communities. I see young people and as a drivers of these said resolutions that are behind us, that countries and delegations are coming to brainstorm and dissect and get the required circular economy around plastic, chemical waste, and all this. And chemical waste are from the the industries. Which industries? The fossil fuel industries. So I think as a youth, we need to emphasize on the net zero we're hoping for, and we just have to strive and make it ambitious. And as this resolution have been adopted and the global agreement have been set down, so the heavy lifting have been done, and what is needed from the youth is to push forward for the political will. And I think we need all the young people in politics so that we can be in offices to push for all this we have been asking for. Yeah, this is what I have to say. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing all of your thoughts. This is amazing. And I think we have to have it connects everything with like Ibrahim said and Michael too, and also everybody in the terms of like having this mindset changed and actually pushing things to be done. And I also liked what you said about it doesn't have to be something like gigantic. We just need like simple things. And just like I think the difference is in the details at this point too, and just make sure we can do our best and have this interdisciplinary thing where we can talk to government and industry and the researchers so we can make this whole difference. So I think this is really cool. I'm really excited. I'm sorry if I'm talking too fast. I try to talk really slowly, but this gets me very, very excited. So without further ado, Shanna, I'm going to take my screen back. It's my pressures now. And I'm going to introduce Leselle, our next speaker. So Leselle Vincent, she is in Trinidad and Tobago. I have here her LinkedIn if you guys want to follow her and talk to her after this event. So she worked for 3 years at the Basel Convention Regional Center for the Caribbean, based in her home country, Trinidad and Tobago. At these organizations, she supported the development and execution of projects to assist regional government and private sector stakeholders with implementing international chemicals and waste conventions. Leselle also contributed to the discussions at UNITAR's stakeholder workshop on strengthening governance for the sound management of chemicals and waste beyond 2020 Frankfurt, Germany in January 2020. Leselle, she's a former member of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. She's currently pursuing a Master of Public Administration in Development Practice with a specialization in international organizations at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs in New York. Sorry, she does a lot of stuff. I'm trying to convey everything. And she hopes to combine her experiences with chemicals and waste, environment and project management, Leselle. Hi, Leselle. To contribute to global sustainable development and environmental resilience for vulnerable communities, particularly in small island development states, such as those within her native Caribbean region. So what Leselle's doing here today, guys, she's going to be talking about segment on multilateral agreements and policy frameworks, and basically like to tell us what we should do in terms of policy now that we know all the problems with chemicals and waste. So she's going to give us some tips and skills on how we can start to addressing them in terms of policy. So I'll stop talking. I'll give you the floor to Leselle, and please, Leselle, tell us everything. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you guys for the discussions.
Thanks so much, Dr. Vidal. Hi everyone, I am Lisa Vincent, as was mentioned, and I'm just going to take us quickly through the different global institutions and so forth that there are to address chemicals and waste management. First of all, I'll start with what a multilateral environmental agreement is, because a lot of people may not know about these establishments, and then go specifically into the chemicals and waste MEAs before saying how we as youth can contribute to these MEAs. So a multilateral environmental agreement is something basically that different international communities and governments come together to create agreements and partnerships for different environmental focuses. And so it's recognizing that environmental challenges are often transboundary and therefore they have global implications, as Shannon explained so marvelously. And so looking at how something that happens in one country, in one community can affect global communities, these agreements come in taking into account that. And so MEAs are legally binding instruments between governments. They typically set an overarching framework to address a specific environmental issue. And so this could be biodiversity, conservation, climate change, desertification, management of chemicals and waste, governance, industrial accidents, and so forth. So there are actually quite a lot of MEAs today. And so these support international collaboration to deal with these challenges by once again setting that framework and bringing countries and leaders together to discuss issues and discuss ways that everyone can have an effect in changing this at both the local, national, regional, and international levels. So MEAs, they provide guidance, but they also complement national and regional legislation. So you already know of a lot of multilateral environmental agreements because there are things that we participate in all the time. So we have the Montreal Protocol, that's an MEA, the Paris Agreement, the Convention to Combat Desertification, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and everyone knows that one, the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, the Convention on Biological Diversity. So you already know what an MEA is, you already know popular MEAs, you've already seen different activities done by governments in regards to one of these MEAs and the regulations that they support. So what are chemicals and waste MEAs? And then CICOM, which is not a multilateral environmental agreement, but it is an overarching framework that countries use to set the scene. So recognizing that chemicals and waste are critical global health and environmental challenges, the UNEP and their partners have created several MEAs specifically aimed at addressing these needs. And so these include the BRS Convention, so that's the Basel Convention on the control of transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal, the Rotterdam Convention on the prior informed consent procedure for certain hazardous chemicals and pesticides in international trade. Yes, they're all very long. They're all very long. And when I was working at the Basel Convention Regional Center, it took me a while to remember them. And then there's the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants. And so those make up the BRS conventions, and those are slightly older. And they have one secretariat, and the secretariat is the leadership body of the convention. And then you have the Minamata Convention on Mercury, which is the most recent of these chemicals and waste conventions, and it's the first and only convention that's specific towards one material, that's mercury. And then the CICOM, which is the Strategic Approach to International Chemicals Management. And once again, this is not an MEA, but it's a global coordination mechanism. And so we want to talk about CICOM as well, just because of how it influences the other MEAs, but how itself is a global and international framework that's very important when coming to chemicals and waste management. So I'll focus a bit on the BRS Convention. So the Basel Convention is the broadest of these conventions. It aims to protect human health and the environment against the adverse effects of all waste. It supports the reduction of the movement of waste between countries and promotes the environmentally sound management of these wastes. And so some of the types of waste covered by the Basel Convention, there are hazardous waste, e-waste, household waste, plastic waste, and other types. There are 189 parties to this convention, and parties are those countries that are bound by the convention and have to follow its regulations, but they also have a say in what it constitutes as being under the regulations of the convention and with setting forth the accountability mechanism. And so the Basel Convention has several partnerships, such as the Partnership for Computing Equipment, PACE, the Mobile Phone Initiative, and then more recently, the Household Waste Partnership and the Plastics Waste Partnership. And with these partnerships, it just gives countries who see these issues as important a chance to come together and set up like technical guidelines for the best practices that could be used and implemented to deal with these wastes. And so the Basel Convention has like centers in countries and regions which help to help countries fulfill the obligations of these conventions. And that's what I worked at, the Basel Convention Regional Center for the Caribbean. So the Rotterdam Convention aims to promote shared responsibility and cooperation in the international trade of banned or restricted hazardous pesticides and industrial chemicals. So this one basically looks at informed information exchange and support of national decision making. And so their main thing is to, when waste has to go from one country to the next country, that countries, before that could be allowed, there's a informed consent process where the person sending the waste has to fill out information on the characteristics of the waste, why they themselves cannot handle the waste, because under the Basel Convention, the Basel Convention promotes the in-country waste management. And so you have to get an acceptance if you want to send waste to another country. And for that to happen, the country that is receiving the waste has to, in essence, has to approve that waste and has to see, okay, well, you in your country definitely cannot handle this waste, but I have the technology and the resources to be able to handle this waste properly. And so that's what the Rotterdam Convention basically sets the scene for. And it has 165 parties. And then the last of the BRS conventions is the Stockholm Convention. And this one is specific to persistent organic pollutants, which Shannon also mentioned. And so this is looking to restrict the production and use of pesticides and industrial chemicals, which contain persistent organic pollutants, and then to reduce the unintentional releases of POPs. And there, when working at the Basel Convention Regional Center, I realized there are chemicals in everything, because obviously everything is made up of a chemical, but like these persistent organic pollutants are used in a lot of different forms. In firefighting foams, for example, the older ones especially have different persistent organic pollutants, and so that has to be taken care of in a certain way. Then something as simple as rubber ducks, like I was there and I'm seeing rubber ducks on Stockholm Convention material, and I'm like, what did the little duckies do? And apparently they are dipped in a persistent organic pollutant in order to help with preservation and so forth. And then they're in some of the older models of cars and so forth. And then, so there are different regulations for these. Obviously, not everything can be banned because of the uses of them, and then also especially in long used items. So a lot of it is just matter of production and manufacturing stages, but also just in the disposal stages. And then for unintentional releases of POPs, UPOPs, in the landfills, when these items are burned, that's where a lot of releases happen. And so that governs like landfilling and how waste is handled at the landfills. And if you ever want to have fun, go to a landfill. I've been to several. So next we have the Minamata Convention, and I did most of my work in the Minamata Convention at the DCRC. And so this here aims to protect human health and the environment from human-caused emissions from human-caused emissions of mercury and mercury compounds. So it looks at regulating mercury supply, sources of trade of mercury, the manufacture, import and export of mercury added products, and other different parts in its articles. And mercury is used in quite a lot of things, from fluorescent light bulbs inside of your home to in skin lightening creams. They have actually, some skin lightening creams have high concentrations of mercury, and this is like used globally, and this is actually like basically directly putting mercury into your skin, which is not good. And then also mercury thermometers and several different sources. And so this convention is just looking at protecting persons from that. So next we have SAICM. And so SAICM, as I said, is not a multilateral environmental agreement, but it is an overarching global framework. And this framework aimed for that, it had a 2020 goal for chemicals to be produced and used in ways that minimize their adverse impacts on the environment and on human health throughout the life cycle. 2020 has passed. I don't know if you all know that, but it has. And so it's just important to note that this goal has not been reached. As such, they have been working on a beyond 2020 framework. However, the final stages of this year-long process had to be postponed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you would assume, because there are so many parties and countries involved in creating these like frameworks, it's a lengthy process. So the Beyond 2020 process took place over several years because everyone has to come together, everyone has to say what's important, everyone has to agree on what's important, and then each part of it would have to go through the lengthy of verification and validation process. And the last thing in SAICM is that there are 5 thematic objective areas. So they're looking at risk reduction, the knowledge and information, because once again, that's important, just making sure that countries and stakeholders and people know what contains these harmful chemicals, know what the environmentally sound management looks like, has resources, and then governance, capacity building and technical cooperation, and then illegal international traffic. So where do you fit in? So conventions realize that youth are significantly vulnerable to chemicals and waste, and as such, they aim to protect the youth. And this vulnerability stems from the fact that youth bodies are still developing, they're still like changing and growing, and so at that stage at a stage where it's not mature, it becomes really susceptible to being affected by these chemicals and waste. And so the chemicals and waste themselves, especially in youth and also women of childbearing age, because of their capacity to have babies, it can impact development processes and create like cancers, as we saw earlier on, and just make it really difficult in that growing stage and have like later on occurrences. So they recognize this and have set forward mechanisms, especially to protect the youth. But is it enough? We'll ask you that in a bit. You can support public consultations. I know the Basel Convention Regional Center, we tried to do a lot of outreach to youth, going to schools to raise awareness, and also like giving youth an opportunity to participate in some of the things that we were doing. And so look out for those opportunities, join youth groups, because like there's power in working with bodies and institutions, and look for these centers, look for the people who are working in chemicals and waste, and talk to them, try to like let them know, hey, I know about this, and so therefore I want to help. And then once again, supporting awareness raising activities. Go share to your parents, share to your friends, hey, you maybe should not be using those fluorescent light bulbs. Let's go for one that does not have mercury, and those like LEDs and so forth. Looking at different products, like instead of using a mercury thermometer, try to find one of the electric ones, and just try to look around your home and see what might have persistent organic pollutants and how to dispose of them. Like if you have electronic waste, try to find someone who can handle it properly and dismantle it properly, because when you send that to the landfill, if it gets crushed, it's going to release pollutants into the environment. If it gets burned, it's going to release pollution into the environment. And so try your best to look up different ways to dispose of your placed properly. And so with that, we move on to the discussion items. So I want to know if anyone has any questions, and then to see if what you think youth can do to continue to support these processes and MEAs, and how can we include diverse youth perspectives in an equal and fair way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lacel. I'm a big fan. And we already have questions. Yoo-hoo, let's go, Yusuf. Tell us, ask us anything that you want to ask Lacel, because I can't talk about anything of multilateral agreements. I think she's super smart. Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's really very interesting to reflect with this agreement again. But my question, just like the last point of your slide, which means how can youth be involved? How can we collaborate with UNEP to address all these problems? I think I came across UNEP Chemical Special Program. I think they have a campaign in Belarus to help the country come up with a global classification of their chemical system, which is not properly classified. So I tried to reach out to the UNEP by sending an email directly, but I didn't get a feedback. So I want to know what are the ways we can get involved in this process or in this convention, directly or indirectly. Thank you.
Hey, yeah, I know sometimes emails can be tricky just because things going into your inbox, people's spam inbox, and people not really checking there. So I think if you could find an organization, I like one of these centers, either in your country or in your region, and look for a number and try to contact a person by phone, I think that might be a bit more helpful. I know at our center we had several phone lines, and so they can call and ask to speak to persons. And then I know this may not always be the case, especially not every country is as small as Trinidad. And so therefore it's not necessary, depending on where you live and the headquarters, the offices, it may not be easy to go in person, but hopefully if it is, then that would be an option. If not, perhaps community officials and community leaders and governments hopefully would have had conversations on waste and chemicals and environmental issues with the relevant UN agencies or convention bodies. And so I don't know, I know that's not really very specifically helpful, but yeah, and I mean, definitely maybe we might have contacts. I don't know, we could see after. But yeah, sorry, Yusuf, if that wasn't enough to answer your question.
Okay, thank you, Lacel. Thank you, Yusuf. Let's go, Domokos. I'm sorry if I can't say that properly, but just go ahead and ask Lacel whatever you want.
Hear me right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Also a question. We have also a question in the chat. Maybe it was before me. So you can ask it later. So thank you for this very professional view. I know the treaties, but so next each other and the differences, very good overview. So thank you very much for that. I have some experience how youth can be engaged, and wanted to answer your question. We have a project. I'm from Hungary. I'm the UN Youth Delegate of Hungary, and we implementing a project in Ukraine and Hungary regarding to the water pollution in a river. And we educated students in schools and created the recycling system. And this project gave me the answer that I think youth projects are maybe more specific and smaller than big initiatives of the United Nations or other governments. And I think this is the key rule of us, that we can implement smaller projects with a very, very small budget, like not small, like I know that it's also money, but in the budget of a state of or the United Nations, they are very, very small amount, but they can have an impact. And I think it's always good that we can share those professional experience. So not just like speaking about the problem, but some youth organizations or like I and my team as individuals, because we are not an organization, we implemented something real. So if you allow me, I would also come to the end and say an example about the Nairobi. So for example, I was able to transfer my project method to Nairobi, and we will implement that in a school in Nairobi now in the next week. So those projects are maybe the key solutions for bigger problems which are addressed by the treaties. So I think this is our rule. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that comment. And just like also to speak to on like financial mechanisms, because I saw a question about that in the chat and online. So they vary by country and by office. And so there are different pools of funding available in different regions and countries, depending that the unfortunately may not necessarily be open for the public to access, but once again the regional offices and government officials can access those. And so therefore it's back again to the communication, which, as pointed out by Yusuf just now, may be a little bit difficult. So it also goes just back to like maybe getting involved in youth organizations and holding those numbers and trying to put pressure on government officials, and also just to like looking up these different opportunities when they come. And I know that puts a lot of work effort on the youth part, but that's the main way to just get involved. And another main funding source for these conventions is actually the Global Environment Fund, the GEF. And so the GEF funds a lot of these projects within the BRS conventions. And so they have that pool of funding. And so they're a main funder under the UNEP. And so it'd be great if y'all can look up the GEF, see what they do, see what their projects are. And I know someone also mentioned about reporting. So on the websites themselves of the various conventions, there is a lot of information, including the reports from meetings that they have, from the COPs that they have. So feel free, it's a lot of information. I'm warning you all one time. So go through that, go through the technical documents and look, that will give you information and see, yeah. Sablon, do we have time for more questions?
Yes, let's go ahead. Sablon, ask Lascelles everything you want.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for this session. It's been quite informative. I'm Zablon from Kenya. I'm following you guys online from the room, and I'm the founder of Plugging Kenya. At Plugging Kenya, we organize for outdoor events like jogging, walking, hiking, cycling, as we collect waste along the trail. We've also managed to bring on board other programs like sanitation and hygiene, climate change, and also school waste program, among others. Okay, this is something Plugging Kenya started in 2019, so we're in process of building and also implementing. Just like any other organization, lack of fund or inadequacy of fund, it's been a challenge, but we are not stopping there. We continue as we look for better days. My concern was on the presentation we made in regards to the conventions which has been made before, like the Basel Convention, and recently I saw one hosted the Rwanda Convention, and others which are yet to come. My concern is, like, as young people, this convention has been made before, but the end up remains in document. How shall we ensure that this convention, like there's one coming, that the plastic treaty is almost coming forth? How shall we ensure that these treaties are adhered to and are implemented? And which organization will be like the watchdog to ensure that everything has been followed to the letter, and we've got a time frame to follow that? That will be my greatest concern as we move with this discussion. Thank you.
So you're speaking on accountability, and so I think, so how these mechanisms typically work, and Dixon, of course, feel free to correct me if I'm getting anything wrong. It goes back to the countries, right? And so I know speaking about the BRS and the Minamata, like they have a convention of parties every year or so. And this is where all of the parties and countries send representatives, they come together and they report on their progress. And normally it's a name and shame game. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of these mechanisms have fines or actual mechanisms to say, oh, you didn't do this, let me punish you. But that name and shame game tends to be effective in some cases, not all. And so it's on the countries themselves to hold themselves accountable, which I'm sure we can all attest to that not necessarily being effective. And so this is where public participation comes into play, and where having that information to know what your government should be doing also comes into play. And this is why I think someone in the chat mentioned that, once again, I can't say this enough, youth organizing is important. But also information and awareness. Like if you don't know what your government is obligated to do, you won't be able to hold them accountable. And so trying to raise that awareness, trying to let people know, hey, our government is signed up to this convention, and by this convention, they're supposed to ban mercury added products by, was initially 2020. A lot of things were supposed to happen in 2020, but COVID. So our government's supposed to ban the production, the import of mercury added products by such and such year. So therefore, like, why are we still seeing it in being added to shelves and so forth? And like kind of like get people to be aware of that, get people to mobilize, get people to talk about it, and put that pressure on the government. I know that has been effective in some countries in the Caribbean. Once again, I recognize Caribbean countries are very small, and so therefore it's a bit easier to do that. But I know like there are some countries that are, most countries are huge, and so it's going to be a little bit harder to mobilize at the national effort. But even start with your communities, start with your regions, and put that pressure on the governments, because in a lot of these international organizations, it's the accountability mechanisms are not strong, they're not effective, and especially with the wealthier countries, like who's telling them not to do stuff, who's telling them not to send their waste to a low-income country because it's easier, right? But also to check and make sure your countries are parties to these conventions. Cough, cough. I know the United States is not a party to the VRS conventions, and y'all could think about the implications of that and why that might be. But yeah, so check on what your government has said that they would do and help to keep them accountable. I don't know if that is it for time. Sorry that I couldn't provide any more help than organize.
I think that was great, Laisel. I don't know what Zeblon thinks of that, but I think you did a great job. And Zeblon, if you have any questions for Laisel after that, you can continue the discussion after. Just add her on LinkedIn. Sorry, Laisel, I'm here like promoting your LinkedIn whatsoever. But I'm a really big fan of her, so I need to control myself. But thank you so much, Laisel. That was wonderful. Thank you all for the questions. And I love to learn more about that. And I think like this is giving us the skills we need to try to understand more about it. Yes, Shannon, applause for Laisel. Thank you very, very much. And yes, I'm gonna share my screen now because, sorry, Laisel, I'm taking over because we have our next speaker. We have Mr. Lavish Reheja here with us. And now we're going to move towards the UNEA and what's happening and the resolutions that we have there. So Lavish Reheja, he's an Indian student and he's a researcher. He's pursuing a master's degree in environmental studies and resource management, from Terry School of Advanced Studies in New Delhi. He has authored more than 25 research articles in the field of chemistry, environment, and education, and he has presented at various national and international conferences held in India. He's also had some research awards, and he's volunteering as a member of the UNEP Major Group for Children and Youth on Chemicals and Waste with us, and giving his significant contribution here. So, okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because Lavish, you have the floor to talk to us and lead the discussion. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Juliana, for inviting. Greetings of the day to everyone. So let's start. So let me come to the first slide. Yeah, sorry. Okay. So we are talking today, we are going to talk about chemicals and waste at UNA 5.2. So what's happening there as a part of the discussions on chemical and waste, we'll be discussing it now onwards. How youth matters here will also be discussed. So what are the resolutions that are being discussed under the consideration of chemical and waste working group are these. First of all, one is sustainable nitrogen management, a resolution on sustainable nitrogen management, and then resolution on sound management of chemical and waste by Switzerland, resolution on science policy panel on chemical waste and pollution, and then resolution on mineral resource governance. So let's look at them one by one and then understand how they are going ahead. First of all, let's discuss about sustainable nitrogen management. So what does this talk about? What does this resolution talk about? This talks about basically half doing half the nitrogen waste by 2030, covering all the spheres of the nitrogen cycle, supported through the establishment of interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism. So it doesn't demand any additional mechanism to be developed, but an disciplinary approach to tackle with the nitrogen waste. So we have already many conventions, and that can be brought into picture for this particular course. And recommendation of operational dimension and elements to define the mandate of interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism. So first of all, why nitrogen management is important and why we are discussing all this, we need to have a background information because it's a little bit technical thing. So let's be aware why nitrogen is being discussed. So first of all, we need to understand the nitrogen cycle. So as you know, we have 78% of nitrogen in our atmosphere, which is the biggest reservoir of nitrogen. So, however, it is to be noted that this dinitrogen, which is present in that, cannot be directly utilized by plants or animals from the atmosphere. What happens is the process of fixation, through which dinitrogen is converted into a utilizable form. Now, there are two types of fixation: biological fixation and anthropogenic fixation. What happens in biological fixation is it's the process of in which naturally occurring microbes do this process of converting dinitrogen into the utilization form by nitrification or some other process that we'll be discussing in the next slide. And in anthropogenic fixation, majorly industries do this process. They let's discuss what happens actually. As you can see in the picture, nitrogen is converted into a utilizable form by plants through the process of nitrification. This nitrification is carried out by both microbes as well as the industrial fertilizers. So, as a part of nitrogen cycle, the denitrification process again converts nitrification utilizable form of nitrogen into dinitrogen again. So what happens is there are two types of fixation: biological and anthropogenic. In anthropogenic fixation, we need it because to feed the globe. It has become essential part of our food security system, and therefore it is needed. But what is the problem with this is we are not able to utilize or manage it properly. Basically, what is happening is we are either excessively using it or wasting it improperly. And what happens then is it converts the nearby fresh lake into a polluted one, or fresh water body into a polluted one, because nitrogen and other elements that are present in the fertilizer being used excessively goes into that one. And again, and if this happens, there is water pollution, and then there is air pollution as well due to the vaporization of those. Basically, we are putting extra burden to the natural resources due to this if we manage it improperly. And that's what is the main concern of this resolution. And so what does resolution talk about is they talk about quantitative and qualitative aspect of nitrogen cycling. So we are going to discuss scientific aspects which are quite quantitative in nature, and then policy, regulation, implementation, and nitrogen budgeting. So how we need to control that management part, and how we need to sustain and how we need to efficiently use the resources. Specifically, nitrogen resources are of important concern because if they are not used properly or in the amount that are desired, they may cause harms to all the system. Even if they are used in lesser quantity, then our food security is threatened. So definitely we need to concern it in a better way. Traditional agricultural wisdom is also an important aspect that has been specifically mentioned in the resolution. So maybe we come up with the traditional approaches that were there. However, problem is this, that main problem is population and the expanding urbanization that has come across with us. So to handle that, we need a balanced approach. So this resolution also aims at assessing the opportunities offered for nitrogen management. Where appropriate mainstreaming can be done through policy implementation and regulatory changes. So what will be the impact of this? So if nitrogen waste is halved, as is the basic aim of this resolution, then all 17 SDGs goals are linked with it. So it helps in reducing poverty, reducing the hunger issues, good health and well-being, quality education, and whatnot. You can see it in the picture. And then what's Houston? We conducted youth consultation session as a part of UNEP or MGCY meetings. So we found specific comments of youth that were all stakeholders, including youth, should be recognized. Means youth, there is opinion of youth that youth should be included in these practices so that they can have better understanding of the subject and better contribution towards sustainability. A ground level approach should be adopted for a better citizen involvement, because otherwise, unless and until you involve citizens, you are going to be, and that behavioral change aspect that was being discussed will be unfulfilled. And then nitrogen neutrality. This issue has not been touched in the resolution, and many technical persons say this should be given an emphasis. So now I would like to invite you to raise any concerns that you have regarding this nitrogen management, any opinions, any kind of discussion, any remarks. Please feel free to raise your hand.
Thank you so much, Lavish. That was awesome. And yes, if you guys want to talk about all of these resolutions with Lavish, please feel free to raise your hand and talk to us. I have here Shannon saying that she loved the highlighting traditional agricultural wisdom that has successfully fed people while sustainable or be sustainable for generations. We have moved too far away from that, and we need to listen, especially to indigenous expertise. Yes, and Lazel confirmed. So if you guys want to ask anything to Lavish in terms of that, please feel free to raise your hand or add that in the chat. See if we have any questions. And Lavish, if you want to talk about anything as well too that you'd like to clarify, please feel free to take the floor.
Yeah, so in terms of nitrogen, we need to consider that food security perspective is the main thing by related to nitrogen management perspective. So definitely, if we are going to talk about it, we have to think of the negative impacts of it, and a balanced approach needed to be adopted. So if there is no question, shall I move on to the next resolution?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. So next resolution is on sound management of chemical and waste. So this is by Switzerland, and so its aim and ambition is to intensify the process of management of chemicals and waste, because it is linked with multiple SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, as we know. Basically, the most directly related are health and well-being, biodiversity conservation, land on life, climate actions, and all these things. So if chemicals and waste are managed properly, then these things can be achieved quite in a ratified way. So that's the main goal of this resolution. And why is this resolution important? Because there is an urgency to tackle the present terms of sustainability. this particular resolution works on all three fronts of the present crisis: climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Let me explain it. Climate, since chemical and waste, this is very much linked with the climate crisis. How does that happen? The gas is released either through industrial waste or through landfills or through any other sort of emission sources. Then they contribute significantly to the atmospheric increased concentration of greenhouse gases, and then that's lead to global warming and other climate change aspects. And further, biodiversity loss. If biodiversity is subjected to waste of chemically contaminated sites or polluted sites, then definitely the population is going to decrease, and that has happened with if you see locally, number like the sparrows, number of sparrows going down or something, the concerns of birds, maybe specifically you can attribute to that. And then pollution aspect, definitely, if that is the basic thing, chemical waste and pollution. The title itself says about pollution. And then the chemical and waste are, as we know, that not yet being managed in the best possible way to minimize the impacts on human health and environment. And their amount of generation is going to grow in future if the present status persists. So since at a large scale, we see no proper management practices, waste management practices are being adopted. So that's the major concern, specifically to a country like India, or where I am living, or the countries which are underdeveloped and have less technologies to deal with waste. So this mechanism also talks about sharing of resources and other facilities to countries so that there is harmony. To put in place a comprehensive and ambitious, what majorly this resolution talks about is to put a comprehensive and ambitious new instrument to promote and support the sound management of chemical and waste beyond 2020. As beyond 2020 is specifically discussed by my previous speaker, Lizel, so you would be knowing that, and including effective means of implementation, and calls on all stakeholders to find creative and flexible ways to bring the negotiation to a successful conclusion. So we want to negotiate on it, and we want to come on a conclusion. But the thing still remains: resolution are one other thing, and then how countries have the political will of countries and economic and budgetary resources are yet another thing. So after a consultation with youth, we found that there should be, youth says that there should be explicit clarification of the stand on transboundary movements of the chemicals and waste, because this resolution doesn't talk about that, the transboundary part of chemicals and waste. And the resolution has specifically emphasized on human rights perspective. So this is appreciated by the youth. And then this is one of my suggestions as well as some of the youth, that there should be a specific task force to list or to identify or characterize hazardous substances on an international scale. That is the mechanism of which is agreed by all countries, so that there is uniformity in the management of waste and a parameterization, because there is a concentration flow. If one country is maybe having more stringent standards and reducing almost all kind of hazardous waste, if the neighborhood country would have that high concentration of pollutants, then both countries are going to suffer, even if one country is taking enough measures to reduce it. So that kind of approach is needed. And then again, I would like to ask any comments on it. That sound management of waste and chemicals. What do you think? Why is it important? However, it has been discussed earlier. I want to specifically understand, what do you think as how it impacts you? The resolutions part, basically. Obviously, theoretically, we have discussed that how waste and chemicals are, deteriorating the environment and human health. But I am specifically wishing, what is your perspective of these resolutions? because these resolutions are going to be, taken by many parties or many countries. So what do you think? How will they handle it, or what everything that you can share?
Okay, I'm waiting to see if anyone has any questions, but we have a comment from Shannon also in the chat. And she said, yes, your health should not depend on the geographic area you happen to be born, or in what type of industry happens to be built near your home. And then we have a question from Michael. So he said, you're an expert in this field. Based on your knowledge, what practical policy implementation do you feel we will have the largest effect on the target of half nitrogen emission by 2030, 8 years from now?
What? Okay, so you are asking basically how doing nitrogen concentration have to help us achieve this achieve goals in the next 8 years. So basically, as we see that this is implementing all kind of sustainable development goals. This is helpful in that. But if you specifically are interested in what kind of scenario we can achieve with this, what kind of scenario we can achieve with this. So largest effect will be obviously the health, ecological health, as well as the human health. If that is fine, that is that covers almost every part. If human health is fine, you have higher productivity. Any attempt that you are making to sustain environment or anything economically, you will obviously have growth, because if health is fine, you get in more productivity, you get more insights, you have better mental health. Obviously, many of the chemicals are neurotoxic, so they cause mental health effects. So these kind of thing is ecological. If you are asking what is the biggest effect, that is ecological and human health improvement. That's what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lavish. And I just wanted to say that we're running a little bit late, guys. So we'll probably have 2 more resolutions to go. So we have around 10, 15 minutes. So we're going to put the link in the chat if you guys want to go back to the main event, to the main Youth Environment Assembly. You just can go ahead. But if you guys want to stay with us and finish this revolution, you're more than welcome to. We'll be here. So yeah, Dixon just put the link in the chat, and I'll give the floor back to Lavish so he can continue the resolutions. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. So next resolution is on Science Policy Panel. There is a resolution by Switzerland for a science policy panel to support action on chemical waste and pollution. The major aims and ambition of this resolution are establishment of an autonomous intergovernmental science policy panel that supports action on chemical waste and pollution. So this is basically an intergovernmental science policy panel. Means you have involvement of many governments. So definitely their stakeholdership will be there, and their responsibility will be there. And science policy, that is an important aspect, because you have scientific knowledge all around. As it had been discussed that in the chat, I saw that there was there is a problem that we are doing some studies, but they are not being elongated or not being widespread because of we don't have that network, so something like that. But a science policy panel will enable to convert scientific knowledge into policy implementation part, because many times it happens that we have scientific knowledge, but we can't explain it to policymakers, and then the policy the scientific advancement goes in vain. So to cover this part, we have this science policy panel. As I said, the proposed function of the panel it wants to identify potential threats, risk related to chemicals, waste, and pollution. What are the emerging issues, opportunities, and providing evidence-based options for solutions to address them. So it's more like you must have heard of IPCC reports. So it's something like that, but specific context to waste. And then coming to its other function, that is, it wants to assess the nature and scale of issues and where appropriate potential solutions. and wants to generate output that inform all actors to support them in developing specific instrumental policies. So we want to make policies better. So therefore, we want scientific intervention. And that scientific intervention cannot be made unless and until we have a better communication or better interface between science and policy. So that's the major goal of this resolution. And it also aims at providing up-to-date relevant information, catalyze scientific research, ensure communication between scientists and policymakers. That is the most important thing. And translate and disseminate findings for different audiences, and ultimately raising public awareness. That obviously covers the behavioral perception part. And why is the establishment of such a panel necessary? If you see, this is the problem: communication of science. As I discussed earlier, we are not able to communicate science to the policymaker, and that's why we are lagging behind. So what does youth say about it? So an emphasis should be given on intergenerational perspective, and the panel should also focus on behavioral and habitual aspects to address the problem of chemical waste and pollution, because a behavioral and habitual part is less touched by this resolution. They are saying about raising public awareness, but the ultimate goal, awareness is another thing, and it converting into action is one another thing. So that is somewhere missing in the context. And the exchange of technical resources among government should be specifically emphasized. They're talking of a lot of resources sharing, but there is a term missing of technicality. There is not basically if countries won't be able to progress if technologies are protected or not shared with each other. So youth says that this technical aspect should be inculcated. And again, I will take this question after the last resolution. So we will combine them together. Resolution on mineral resource governance, and this is specifically about minerals. So its aims and ambitions are to, it stresses the urgency of enhanced global policy action and governance of mineral resources to address environmental challenges, specifically related to mining related practices. And it directly relates with the SDG goal 12, that is sustainable production and consumption. Because if there is proper mineral resource, if you manage in a way that it sustains for future generation, then it's obviously comes under that sustainable production and consumption. It talks about the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. It talks about the Paris Agreement. It talks about the post-2000 Global Diversity Agreement. It says that all these resolutions, all these multilateral environmental agreements, what we have discussed, are emphasizing on achieving some goals, and these goals will be unfulfilled if we do not cover this aspect, that is mineral resource governance, and that is to be very sustainable in nature, because it's not only about environmental health, but also associated with the exploitation and child exploitation, as well as exposure part that is causing huge health harms to the laborers. So it says about to convene an ad hoc open-ended working group with the aim of developing recommendation to reduce the environmental impacts of mineral extraction along the full life cycle of mine. So to the creation of mine, to the ending of mine, and then reservation. That is what's the goal of this. And then enhancing responsible business practices, including transparency and environmental due diligence. Environment should be given a priority. And importance of the resolution is because the mainstreaming of environmental concern in mineral resource governance is an urgency. It is an essential requirement of achieving the vision entailed in various multilateral environmental agreements. And then, of course, they are not only related to the environmental health, but human health, as I discussed, the safety issues of labor. So what does youth say about it? They say that there should be higher engagement of youth in the proposed open-handed working group. And then a circular economy approach for mineral resource governance should be adopted. So if that happens, then we have a kind of a chain that recycles, and then or whatever the mechanism of circular economy goes on, communicates to that. A special concern of child labor and exploitation should be there. there is no specific mention of child labor and exploitation, so that should be present in the resolution, and the aspect of inclusion should be touched while decision, because many countries have economies hugely dependent on these mineral resources. So if we say stop your mines or cut down your mines to that extent or extraction to that extent, then that may be not economically feasible for that country. So the inclusion should be there. That's the opinion of youth. Also, one other thing that you talked about is the approach to risk. Risk is a function of hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. Means what is the problem? Like mining is in itself an hazardous state because it harms environment, it harms human, it harms nearby soil. So hazard and then vulnerability. It means who are more sensitive to that particular issue, and then exposure, like who are being exposed or who are being exposed to that particular problem. Now, this resolution mainly focuses on the exposure reduction. It rarely talks about hazard and vulnerability, so that aspect should be touched. That's the opinion of the youth. Okay, if you have any question, let me just finish it, and then we'll have the question session. So why does youth take interest in these resolutions? Let's talk about that. So the proper management of nitrogen, chemicals, waste, and mineral resources will lead to enhanced quality of soil, water, and air. Has a very basic direct consequence, right? If we have improved air, water, and soil, and which will lead to production and consumption of lesser contaminated materials or food, creating uplifted standards of life. That's the one thing I have written. There are many other implications, but that is one of the basic implications for youth and future generations. So the science policy panel providing an interface between scientific knowledge. So that's the one part where we are talking about nitrogen management and chemical waste and pollution management, waste and mineral resource management. And one other part is science policy panel that is providing an interface between science and policy. So yeah, that will also help us achieving more goals in the conformity with modern advancements. So yeah, that's all about it. Thank you. Now I would like to have some questions or discussion part. Basically, I'm not a very good expert in these fields, but yeah, if any discussion, I would like to engage in.
Thank you so much, Lavish, where people put things in the chat or get some courage to raise their hands. I'm just going to say thank you very much for all of your inputs and everything. And you said it's really, really cool. And Shannon is going crazy in the chat with her comments too. We're all with you. And yes, we have here the polls. I don't know if you can see the poll or yes, I hope you can. So like with the answers of how you're feeling today, where you're from, and all of those things. So we just want to say, if you guys don't have any questions for Lavish, please feel free to stalk him on social media, stalk him on LinkedIn, ask him any questions that you guys might have. And I just wanted to like end this event or try to end in a positive, beautiful way. I will try to leave here our social media handles. If you guys want to follow our Chemicals and Waste platform and engage with us, we're always looking for people to help and people to get engaged and actually try to mobilize and have this change in the mindset of how we can achieve sustainability and work in all of the sectors of industry, government, and research to actually make this work. So please engage with us, reach out to us. We would love to answer your questions and engage more with you. And yes, in terms of the event, I hope you had a good time, and I hope we were able to show you how we can actually make a difference and how this problem of chemicals and waste is very important. I'm not saying that the other problems are not important, but we actually have to, and we can do that. Okay, we have a raised hand. Okay, so, okay, wait, I'm lost here. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can get a raised hand. Okay, Yarivis, please correct me if I'm wrong, but
yes.
Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, it's okay. Hello, thank you for the opportunity. I have a general comment. A use of chemical is already complex. you mentioned their name is scary. However, it's not all bad. The bad thing has been the management of chemical and wastes once they are used. I believe that by promoting good management of this state of wastes, we could, I don't know, even promote the circular economy and reduce greenhouse gas emission. Many young people that do science research and already take into account. I believe that by doing applied and transferring science at the service of everyone, we can, I don't know, solve many problems, maybe. Sorry, my English is very bad. For example, in Argentina, I am recycling lithium-ion battery for electric cars and mobile phones. We have a heat chemical contained. Once recovered, we manufacture the new battery cells. We have several processes that we want to make to everyone for, you know, but bureaucratic usage prevent use from doing. I wonder how I can get support and promote these results. This is a big problem for young. I believe the problem, the creative space to the publicists and the people science research could help us.
Yay, thank you, Judith. Yes, I think this is wonderful, and I loved what you said about the circular economy too. Yes, I think we're all working with the same goals, and I think like what I like about like chemicals and waste is like how interdisciplinary we can go and how like different aspects we can search. And yes, thank you guys so much for all of the inputs. That was amazing. I'm very, very excited to see everything you had to say. We were wondering if we could take a group picture. I don't know if you guys would be up to it, but if you could turn on your cameras and